I just finished completely reorganizing my stamps, dies, stencils, and embossing folders, both physically and electronically. And while I was doing that, I came across some old items that I've been holding on to but not using. I decided to challenge myself to use a few of them in a new way, to decide whether it was time for them to go to a new home. The first one is this detailed floral die from Hero Arts. I've used it a couple of times, and I think it's a great way to whip up a quick wedding card especially, but also Mother's Day or birthday or really any occasion. Do you ever stereotype your supplies like that? I do, especially when I think I've made a really good card with it. So I cut it from white cardstock using my Gemini Junior, and even though it cut through, there were still lots of little pieces that needed to be weeded out. While I was doing this, I was really thinking that I'm too old to keep products that are difficult to work with, and I vowed that if even one little piece of this did not pop out easily, I would destash the die, as pretty as it is and as much as I like it. I have definitely done this before. As I say, I'm not messing around. I do try to give it a fair shot, but I'm not keeping things that don't work easily for me. With an intricate die like this one, I generally will run it through once with the cutting edges of the die facing down, and then flip my whole sandwich and run it through again, with the cutting edges facing up. If it doesn't work after that, it's gone. And this one worked, I'm happy to say, because it really is a pretty die. And the way I'm changing it up for today's card is to cut it again with a large heart die. I positioned the heart die so I liked what was on the inside, and then I ran it through the die cutting machine. I also cut a solid white heart with the same die to act as a backer. Now that's pretty all white on white, but I've done that before, so I grabbed some Copic markers and I started coloring. The only tricky thing with this is that you have to decide where the leaves and the flowers overlap, which area is what. But overall, there's so much to look at on this design, it's pretty forgiving. I ended up with a surprise little butterfly down there, so I grabbed a dark gray marker for his body. I glued the flowers to the white heart, but you could get so many different looks with this by changing the colors on the flowers or the color of the background. If you don't have a die like this, you could create a similar look by cutting flowers, coloring them, and gluing them onto a panel, and then die cutting with a heart die. I added my standard iridescent spray and gold watercolor splatter to the panel, and also to my die-cut Mother's Day sentiment to soften the black a little bit. And instead of just adding the heart to a white card base, I cut another white panel and I used the die to emboss the panel to give some texture to my background without making it feel busy at all. Over the years, I've played around and I figured out my sandwiches for doing embossing with dies or embossing with stencils, or even the sandwiches for different 3D embossing folders. Have you noticed how different they are when they're from different companies? I've written down my sandwiches as a quick reference that's sitting right next to my die cutting station. To finish this one, I popped up the floral heart and I added a few yellow confetti sequins from a Colorful Life Designs. When I reorganized, it was to solve one of the biggest problems I had in my craft room, which was that I was keeping things in different places. So if I was looking for a particular stamp set, it might have been in one of 3 different places because of how my previous system had evolved over time. Now everything I have is in one place. If you're interested in crafty organization, make sure to sign up for a free ticket to the Paper Crafters Get Organized Summit, coming next weekend. I have a full 15-minute video with all the details of my old system and what I kept from that, as well as all the changes I made to make it so much better. Plus, I'm sharing a list of the 5 steps you can use to discover your perfect system. Plus, there are ideas from over 25 other speakers on a whole range of organizing topics. I've put a link in the description below so you can get your free ticket. I hope to see you there. Next up is a little tulip stamp from Altenew. I've had this one forever, and I can't remember if I've used it before. I love tulips, but this one is a little odd or maybe artistic in its proportions. I decided to try it out with my stamp wheel on a 6-inch square white panel of cardstock. I positioned it close to the center of the wheel so that my tulip mandala will be as small as possible, so I could fit the most tulips on my card, but I quickly realized that this meant there would be overlap on the leaves. So I stamped the tulip only 4 times on the first round. Then I stamped the last one again onto a Post-it note. I only need to mask the leaves and the very bottom of the flower, and I need 2 so that I can stamp the flower in between. This mask was pretty delicate because of the small area where the leaves attach to the stem. I stamped the first one in between, then started moving the masks around so I could stamp the rest of them in. You don't need a stamp wheel to create a pattern like this with a stamp, but it definitely makes it easy to be sure that all the angles and placement are precise. I'll link a video right here to show you how you can also do it with a MISTI, but you can also just eye it up. I grabbed a rectangle die so I could choose how I wanted to trim the panel down to fit on my card, and I ended up with kind of a tilted orientation. That gave me 2 full tulips at the top and bottom, and trimmed off the 2 on the right and left sides. And then came all the coloring. I haven't done this much work with my Copic markers in a long time, and it quickly became apparent that they are in need of some TLC, some cleanup and refilling. I did a little bit of shading on the leaves, but I really reserved the bigger flowers for my more complicated shading. I've been learning a little bit about cast shadows, and I know that the base of the tulips will be the darkest, and by putting a dark line around the outside 2 edges of the front petal, it'll make that petal look more rounded. I worked my way up through my pinks to the lightest color, and I wasn't afraid to leave some small areas white as highlights. My thoughts on whether to keep this stamp? Well, I'm not 100% in love with it. And it's a little big, really, if you want to put a lot of them on a card. On the other hand, I do love tulips, and I don't have a tulip stamp I like better, so this one stays for now. I went back and quickly added some darker green for bigger contrast in the leaves, and finally I went over the flowers with a very pale yellow, just to warm them up a little bit. To finish this one, I cut a circle from the center where the stems were crossing over. It really just wasn't very pretty. I added the shimmer spray and gold splatter, and I popped it up on a white card before adding a die-cut Concord and Night Sentiment and some blackout confetti sequins from a Colorful Life Designs. My third one, I already know. I'm never getting rid of this set of border dies from Pretty Pink Posh, but I do think I need to use it more often. These dies are just good basics, and I think it's good to keep basic shapes and patterns around, even if they're no longer the latest and greatest. Here's the first reason. I cut 4 of these from a panel of white cardstock, and if you cut them carefully, you can actually create another border that looks like this. This die allows you to just line the layers up, but I want to offset them to get more of a mermaid or fish scale kind of look. First though, I added ink to them. I made 2 of them with Party Dress, and I did that first on my turntable with a blending brush. You could go direct to paper if you prefer, or use colored cardstock. I did one with Tiki Torch, and I finished off with one in Lime Ricky. This is such a fun spring color combination, really vibrant and full of life. I used the shape of the scallops to line up the next row, so for each low point on the pink strip, I put the highest point of the orange. It's nice that these are pretty long, so it doesn't matter that the ends are not lining up, since I'll be trimming it down to fit on my card. Then I did the same with the green, and finally with the other pink strip. There is a bit of bulk to this, but not too much, since the strips are not too wide. And just to be sure I had it glued securely, I flipped it all over and added some tape. I trimmed it down to fit my 4-inch panel. This is another classic pattern that could be used in so many ways with different colors. I grabbed a new scrapbook.com sentiment die that I got recently, and I cut the letters from white and the shadow from black for a high contrast, punchy look. To finish this one, I simply added some more of those blackout confetti sequins. Do you have any old favorites that need some love? Why not try taking them out and take a look at them with fresh eyes and ideas to get even more out of them? Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.